3, 2, 1.
In Los Angeles right now as an art major, as an artist.
Where do you sit on the issue of Andy Warhol?
Well, Andy Warhol. I'm very positive about Andy Warhol. I mean, I think maybe it's gone too far by now, but you know, I certainly have an enormous sympathy for Andy Warhol and everything that he was able to. I mean, I see Andy Warhol as if he's kind of the savior who follows Salvador Dali, who was the John the Baptist. I actually think I like Dali more from myself. But I mean, they both were so liberating.
Yeah.
The interesting thing to me is that people that the art world, and including the intelligentsia and the academy, has embraced Warhol, and yet they still bristle at the idea of dealing with Dali, even though almost everything. I mean, Warhol was standing on Dali's shoulders.
Yeah.
In every way, and
do you think it's the figuration in Dali's work?
I think you can be ahead of your time.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And there's a certain disadvantage to that.
Yeah.
And I just think that Dali's why not kind of attitude towards art.
Yeah.
Simply was manifest before people were willing to go along with it.
But he also sits, I mean, his career was extremely long, of course, because he lived to a ripe old age. I think he only died in about 1988.
Oh, you're gonna try. Yes, something like that. Dali lived a long while, huh?
Yeah, but I was going to say, to me, I think he sits. His difficult place in art history is because his works are almost photorealistic depictions of dreams, so therefore they are highly figurative in a time when that was largely been rejected.
Well, and wasn't it not only rejected, but it was very much associated with
Kitsch.
Victorian. No, well, but with I think with political regimes that were monolithic, with either Stalinist or fascist.
Yeah.
States which would insist that art emphasize that kind of realism, and so it seemed like it was a political gesture on his part rather than an aesthetic one, which I think is nuts. But but whatever. I mean, there's so much realism today. There's so much photography in art today. There's so much cinema in art today everywhere that that kind of that kind of interest in realism, whether Warhol or Dali or the others. I mean, it hardly seems far-fetched or anti-modern anymore. Postmodern, right?
Yeah. Well, I think even the notion of, when I very first started teaching, which was in '97, one of the first courses I taught on was called Mapping the Postmodern. And then the word postmodern still had a kind of a buzz of newness about it. But whenever it sort of comes into theoretical conversations now, it just sort of seems...
Did we really talk that way?
Yeah, it just seems really dated.
Did we really use hula hoops and so on and so forth? Yeah, I suppose that's true.
And this is, I think, one of the reasons why I'm fascinated in, go back to the issue of what was modernism, which is, the whole underlying question of this video project, because I think that notions of postmodernism have in many ways kind of passed, but I think there's still something residual there. It's just not the thing that we're no longer debating where to put the goalposts. We're no longer debating the rules in a way of what postmodernism is. It's all accepted, and it's now a dull conversation to have, so we just sort of have moved on. But I think modernism is still kind of hanging around. for art historians, the idea of the sort of ultra-modern, going looking at other different alternatives for modernism, other counter-narratives or other things that didn't fit into the canon.
Well, the canon, I think looking back that the biggest change in the century was pop, and just the success of asserting the idea that pop culture, the effort that went into making a television program or a musical recording or something or other, was not necessarily any different from the effort that went into writing the Odyssey or composing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and that you could be an expert in the Chorales as much as you could be an expert in Faulkner, and that expansion of the canon, which was long overdue, and I think incredibly welcome, has, it seemed to me, only one eventual drawback, which is where do you put it all? And so, because there's as much history, happening today that happened all last year, and there's last year's history is bigger than the entire previous decade, and that decade's history was, bigger than the previous millennium in terms of the documentation, the recording, the amount of activity that we're aware of, and so on and so forth. So the size of history, whether it's just, where is a museum going to have, the rooms to collect and display everything worthwhile, for new generations. I don't know. That's going to be the real challenge for you and your students to figure out how do you, and will that oblige us to take a new canon? In other words, does there have to be some kind of whittling down of sheeps and goats just to fit the available, to get on the arc?
I've got one last question. What advice, if you could give advice to students who are looking to be writers within art history and theory or art criticism, what advice would you give them?
That's some question. I don't know if I have any advice for them. I would say, that as a writer, you want to visualize as much as possible. I would assume that that our given tradition that in the beginning was the word is obviously wrong. We're now in a situation where in the beginning was the image, and so writing is going to become a handmaiden to image documentation, and I think that's what to do, is to be able to try to forget as much as possible, forget about writing that's standalone, and find the most exquisite, creative ways to write with the image, not to the image, but with it.